As Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana is expected to table his budget speech tomorrow, various sectors, including ordinary South Africans, will be waiting with bated breath to see if there will be a VAT increase. Well, some are calling for an increase in the allocation for local government. You then also have unions warning government not to renege on the 5.5% wage offer that was presented to unions in the public sector. So now let's speak to Professor Keith Engel, CEO of the South African Institute of Taxation. Prof, good evening to you. Always a pleasure to have a conversation with you. So, VAT, right, was a sticking point in February, and it seemed it was what really caused what we then saw, as we saw with various statements from different political parties and their voices. What are you expecting?
Well, the issue really is how much you're committed on the expenditure side. The VAT is really a symptom of a larger problem. You need to raise taxes if you believe we need to keep increasing the size of government. And really what you're seeing is the ANC has doubled down on that. They said we're going to increase the size of government, and therefore the easiest way to get the money is the VAT. And what the pushback is, well, do you really need to increase the size of government, or do you need to cut things and reshift in order of priority? So it's now really a question of political power. Now, it sounds like the ANC has scaled back some of their demands, but not all of them. So now we're talking about a 0.75 or, 1. And I think the DA, from a political matter, they can't go along with that. And so does the power ahead and say, we're going on with a smaller VAT increase and then hope to get the other parties such as the EFF and the MK to go along, which I don't think they will. But really the problem is it's an expenditure battle and it's spilling over onto the tax side, and the tax side is an easy political win for the opposition.
I want to stay with something that you said, because it's been resonating with quite a number of the viewers that we've been asking to give some tips to the minister. They say, reduce the size of government. We certainly cannot afford to continue with this. Are they likely to have their wish come true?
I don't think so. And I think, look, it can be done, but the difficulty is that really the ANC went for its voter base, and its voter base, they felt that cuts were going to sacrifice their voter base. I frankly think you can come with the scalpel without cutting too many things off of the ANC voter base and do a fair amount of reshifting. But even then, with the demands they have, you might need a partial increase. And my problem is that I think a little more imagination should have gone into the other alternatives. It might not have had to be, if you needed part of the money, it didn't necessarily have to come from VAT. It could have come from some other changes that were made on the income tax side and the use of the revenue service on their skill set. And I think some of the money could have been made up that way. So we seem to be oversimplifying this matter, so it's becoming a lot more contentious. If we think a little bit more constructively and creatively, we can have a bit of an increase in government and a bit of tax increase without such pain. And maybe that's the compromise I would hope people would reach, but I don't think they're there.
I want to get to SARS in just a moment, but when you talk about this tough balancing act, it's something that we always speak about when the Minister of Finance, it doesn't matter who they are, is going to be tabling their budget, because it speaks about, one, a constrained public purse that we've seen over time. But given the fact that right now you do have a government of national unity with different voices, a government now that is made up of parties that would have made promises to the electorate, how much of a tough balancing act is that, just alone?
Well, I think it's an extremely tough balancing act. So let me just jump for the poor Minister of Finance. The difficulty is the Minister of Finance no longer has the power that he once had. So in the days of Trevor Manuel, you probably would have had a very different outcome, because Trevor Manuel, as well as Pravin Gordhan to some extent, had the ability to control the expenditure side as well as first say on the tax side. What you're seeing is that the new Minister of Finance over the last number of years really is subject to party discipline. So the expenditure side, he has very little flexibility on. So the only option he has left is, without that flexibility, is to do something on the tax side. So I think the situation is very hard, because our Minister of Finance just no longer has the power they once had due to other politics. And now that you add the GNU in the mix, he no longer has the freedom to ram through what the ANC wants on the political side. So his boxes are getting shorter and shorter, no matter who he is. And I think it's becoming more and more of an impossible task. The only really way, again, is to see if we can make a reasonable compromise with a scalpel rather than a bludgeon. And unfortunately, politics likes bludgeons. They don't like scalpels.
And you then have, our viewers who are saying, for example, if government efficiency, make sure that the departments are doing what they're supposed to be doing, and then at the same time steer clear of, any VAT increase. But it seems that a number of those we've been speaking to are talking about strengthening SARS, and they say that make sure that you boost that particular institution in order to ensure that it does a bit more as far as revenue collection is concerned. And where do they begin if they are to do this, and which areas do they start?
Well, let me say this. SARS is a lot stronger than it once was. I think there's a big debate. I do feel SARS is as strong as it was 10 to 15 years ago, in many ways stronger. I mean, now, again, that's very contentious, and some people will be angry at me for that. But I do think that it's bounced back. But we're asking now for SARS to do more than it's ever done before. And it's not just about SARS. So what you hear the commissioner talking about is what you really need to do is increase the ability for third-party information. And that isn't just fixing SARS's budget. It's about fixing a number of other budgets to link into SARS. So the one that the commissioner has brought up is a single taxpayer ID. 2, government payments are not connected to SARS. So SARS doesn't see what government is paying out. So a number of things can be fixed. That's not necessarily direct SARS, but it's the feed into SARS. That's what needs to be done there. And then 2, we really have to make a decision about our informal sector, what we want. And unfortunately, we've had these battles before that people think that they can apply the same rules to the formal sector as the informal. We need to extend the tax base, but in a very light way so that it's broader based out into the communities. That's the only way to get there. And then there are issues of pure enforcement, where then you just need to give SARS more capacity and the MPA more capacity. So it's not just, the old thing was, just get some more money in SARS. It's not just putting money in SARS, it's making sure that SARS has a framework around it in which it can draw from. That's what really, I think, is needed.
When you think about, personal income tax, there are some who are on tenterhooks, right? And there's a view from some who are saying that South Africans are in fact bearing one of the heaviest burdens of taxation as compared to other parts of the world. Is that the case? And how do we begin to ease this, especially amid the rising cost of living?
Well, here's what we have. We are being taxed like the Europeans, who are the highest tax in the world, but we don't have the services of the Europeans. So if you're going to compare us with the Europeans, yes, the VAT rate isn't as high as Europe, but if you look at our overall rates, we're getting increasingly like Europe without the benefits. So that's the vice that we're in. And so one of the things is if we're going to extend the tax base is, and that's where the screaming is, don't go after the compliant. What you have to do is get the non-compliant. And that's why people who are wholly outside the system is very difficult for SARS to get on its own. And that's why you need to extend the environment around it so they have something to grapple onto. Because the people who are honest and who are compliant are now overtaxed and they're broken. And so you've got to go beyond that group.
What about the wealth tax, briefly?
The wealth tax is one of these things that feels nice, but won't get you the money it needs. It simply won't, even if it works. And it will also take 2 or 3 years to implement. And the other problem with wealth taxes is that, when we talk about wealth tax, it's the real money is what you call and I call just an upper middle. If you're making 2 million rand, you're not wealthy. I'm not saying you're poor, but you're not wealthy. And what we have is a 45% rate on that. When you convert it into European currencies and dollar currencies, what you're seeing is the fear is the wealth tax will fall on the upper middle. The real problem is the wealth tax, you can get the super rich, but there just isn't enough of them there. And unfortunately, a lot of that money is already left. And unfortunately, also, you go after it, they leave.
Prof, let's see what happens then tomorrow. Tough times indeed, and I'm keen to hear your thoughts, on what we hear tomorrow. Thank you so much for chatting to us. Appreciate it. That is Professor Keith Engel, the CEO of the South African Institute of Taxation. Let's take a short break. We'll be back straight afterwards.